a rule you'll have to break to know the truth.
Which is?
The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules. And tonight, you're gonna break your one rule.
I'm considering it.
No, there's only minutes left, so you're gonna have to play my little game if you want to save one of them.
Yeah.
You know, for a while there, I thought you really were a dent. The way you threw yourself after her. Look at you go! Does Harvey know about you and his little bunnies?
Where are they?
Killing is making a choice.
Where are they?
Choose between one life or the other. Your friend, the district attorney, or his blushing bride to be. You have nothing to threaten me with. Nothing to do with all your strength. Don't worry, I'm gonna tell you where they are. Both of them. And that's the point. You'll have to choose. He's at 250 52nd Street, and she's on Avenue X. That's just who.
All right, so that was another, pretty famous scene in a movie that, definitely involves some game theoretic logic. So the Joker has kidnapped Harvey Dent and Rachel Dawes, and he's placed them in two separate locations. And he tells Batman he's going to have to play his game if he wants to save one of them. Now, of course, we know, and as well as the Joker knows, that Batman, Bruce Wayne, has a relationship with Rachel, and currently Harvey and Rachel are an item. So this was Rachel, once dated Bruce Wayne, and Batman still has feelings for her. And Joker knows this, and he sets up this game where he knows that Batman is going to try to save Rachel. And I'm not going to spoil, the scene, but as we know, the Joker was correct, and ultimately he is not completely honest with Batman as to where the two people are. And so this is a situation where the Joker has created a game, but he's not being forthcoming with Batman about the actual. So the information is not perfect. And anytime information is not perfect, this increases uncertainty, and the ability of players to make sound, rational decisions becomes very difficult. In the previous video, we talked about the prisoner's dilemma, and we talked about the fact that there is this collusive outcome that the two players can choose to both lie to the cops, and they'll only go to jail for 1 year. But we also showed why we think the Nash Equilibrium, the non-cooperative equilibrium, will be the one that actually gets played because there's a trust issue. So just real quick, to kind of talk about the determinants of cooperation, there's really just two factors that at play. The first off is the number of players. So as you increase the number of players, it becomes harder to be certain, and it becomes harder to trust. And so therefore collusion becomes more difficult. Most of the time in the games we'll talk about in this class, we're only talking about 2 players. But anytime you have to have more than 2 players come to an agreement, it becomes harder to maintain that cooperation. And then number of rounds. When we mean rounds here, we mean the number of times the game is played. So far, we've only discussed simultaneous one-shot games, meaning that the game is played exactly once. When that's the case, trust and therefore the ability to collude is very, very difficult. And so, in fact, as the number of rounds the game is played, you are able to build up trust. You're able to build up the chances of collusion because for a number of reasons. First off, if the game is played multiple rounds, you get to see if the person you're trying to cooperate actually cooperates or whether they cheat on the collusive agreement. Additionally, you can punish the player if they cheat in subsequent rounds. So maybe you went into a game with a collusive agreement, you see that one of the players cheats on that collusive agreement, and then you can punish them in subsequent rounds by also not going along with the collusive agreement. So let's go back and let's look at this a little bit more specifically to the duopoly example that we began this chapter and ended the last chapter, which is we have these two competing paper companies, Dunder Mifflin and Osprey. We've already determined the four potential outcomes of the game, the one where they both collude, the one where they both compete with each other, and then the two outcomes where one chooses compete and the other chooses collude. We already also determined that if we went through and we developed the strategies of this game, that both players have a dominant strategy to compete. That is to cheat on the collusive agreement. And again, we can just go through the strategies. So if I'm Dunder Mifflin, if I expect Osprey to choose collude, I do better if I choose compete, because 36 is less than 40. And then if Osprey chooses to compete, I do better by also competing, because 32 is better than 30. And the payoffs here are symmetric, so we really don't need to go through and look at Osprey's strategies. We know that Osprey is going to have the exact same strategy, and that is that they both have a dominant strategy to pick compete. And so this compete outcome here, both choosing compete, this is our Nash equilibrium. However, we do have a potential collusive outcome. And again, the reason why this is a potential collusive outcome is because both players do better in the collusive outcome than they do in the Nash equilibrium outcome. Now, one big problem that students have sometimes is they think that Nash equilibrium is the best possible outcome for both players. And so they'll look at this game and they'll say, look, both choosing collude is better for both of them. This must be the Nash equilibrium. It's important to remember the Nash equilibrium is specifically a non-cooperative outcome. So even if the cooperative outcome, the collusive outcome, is better for both players than the one that comes from the development of strategies, which again is both choosing compete here because they both have a dominant strategy to pick compete. Again, this is the Nash equilibrium. This is a potential collusive agreement. So the Nash equilibrium is specifically non-cooperative, and the collusive agreement, of course, is specifically cooperative. Now, if this game is played only once, that is to say that the decisions are made simultaneously and the game played once and then the game ends, we firmly believe that both players are going to pick the Nash equilibrium outcome. That is that they're both going to pick compete, and they'll both earn profits of $32. And the reason why is because playing the game only once doesn't allow for any buildup of trust. They're both going to go into the game, and even if they have this collusive agreement, actually the establishment of the collusive agreement further pushes them towards the Nash equilibrium. And here's why. If I'm Dunder Mifflin and I've created an agreement with Osprey to collude, I know that I'll earn $36 if we both collude. However, I can do better if I think Osprey is going to choose collude. I can do better as Dunder Mifflin by choosing compete. So from just a strict rationality perspective, and because this game is only played once, therefore Dunder Mifflin can't be punished by Osprey in future rounds for choosing to compete, there's a pretty strong incentive for Dunder Mifflin to choose compete. Of course, Osprey has the exact same incentive. And so despite the fact that the collusive agreement, potential collusive agreement, is more lucrative than the Nash equilibrium, we still expect the Nash equilibrium to occur because of these incentives to cheat on any particular collusive agreement. And again, the way in which collusive agreements are maintained is through trust. But now let's imagine this game is played 5 times. Okay, in other words, let's say that this game has 5 rounds. Okay, and let's see what happens if the game has 5 rounds. Okay, so let's assume there's 4 potential scenarios. They collude for all 5 rounds. This would mean that both players get $36 for 5 rounds. Going the wrong way. And so 36 times 5 is $180. So if they collude for all 5 rounds, they earn $180. If the second scenario is that they collude for the first 4 rounds and then cheat in the 5th. And the reason why they would choose to cheat in the 5th is because as you get to that sorry, as you get to that final round, okay, you go, okay, the game is not going to be played after the 5th round. I have no incentive to keep colluding because, again, if I expect the other player to collude, I do better, in fact, by choosing to compete. Both players have this potential strategy. And so we expect in that last round for the players to choose compete as opposed to choosing collude, and we can see how they do. A little bit worse than if they collude in all 5 rounds. Now, a third scenario is one player cheats in the very first round, and then the Nash thereafter. So in other words, player one, some player cheats first, and then the collusive agreement is lost. So one player stuck with the collusive agreement while one player cheated in the first round, and then we have the Nash thereafter, so no more collusive agreement. The cheater gets 168, while the colluder gets 158. And so we can see that the cheater gets a little bit more than the colluder in this scenario. But again, importantly, not as good as if they maintain the collusive agreement for all 5 rounds. And then finally, the outcome, if they don't collude at all for all 5 rounds and they just earn competitive profits, they get 160. And so what you can see is that when the game is played multiple times, the incentive to collude increases. And not only does the incentive to collude increase, but the incentive to maintain that collusive agreement also improves. Okay, so let's talk about the game show example that we talked about in class previously, the Golden Balls example. So again, just to give you a setup here, this is a game show in which players answer trivia questions and build up a pot of money. And then at the end of the game are forced into making a split or steal decision. And then how much money they go home with is dependent upon not only what they choose, but what the other player picks. Okay, so up to this point of the game, they have been in a cooperative answering trivia questions to build up money. And then, of course, they are pitted against each other when they get to this part of the game. If they both choose split, they split the money 50-50, and everyone, so they just go home with exactly half of the money that they earned. If they both choose steal, they go home with nothing. And then if one player picks split and the other player picks steal, the split player gets 0 and the steal player gets all of it. And then, of course, we can see that that's the same here for the other way as well. And so the question then becomes, okay, well, what's the Nash equilibrium and what's the collusive agreement? Well, clearly the collusive agreement is for them both to split the money. And in fact, in the game, as we saw, both players are able to talk to each other prior to making this particular decision. And when they talk to each other, they say, hey, let's split the money, right? So in fact, they are allowed to talk to each other, and almost every time the players say, yes, let's split the money. And so they're trying to build up that trust we were just talking about. But remember, this game is only played once. So, it's hard. There's not multiple rounds. Now, the truth is that there's a bit of an ambiguity here. And what I mean by that is, well, let's first develop the strategies. So let's say I'm player 1. If player 2 picks split, clearly I have an incentive to steal because 100 is greater than 50. And so if I think player 2 is going to pick split, then I want to pick steal. And then if I think player 2 is going to pick steal, then it becomes a question of spite. Okay, so if I think the other player is going to pick steal, if I pick split, I'm going to get 0 and they're going to get all of it. If I pick steal, we're both going to have 0. So the question becomes, if I think the other player is going to pick steal, do I want, I'm going to get 0 regardless, right? If the other player picks steal, that means I'm going to get 0 regardless. Then the question becomes, do I want the other player who stole, do I want them to get all of the money, right? And so what we can say here is that if people are spiteful, as humans typically are, then we're able to say that the steal outcome is in fact the Nash equilibrium because the players would have a dominant strategy to steal. We already saw that the players have an incentive to pick steal if they think the other player is going to pick split, right? Player 2 picking split means that player 1 is going to want to pick steal. And then if player 1 picks split, we can see that player 2, again, is going to have this incentive to pick steal. So we know that when they expect the players to split, there's this incentive to steal. And then the question becomes, well, if the other player picks steal, what do I want to pick? And if we assume that humans are spiteful, which I think is a pretty safe assumption, then we get that there's this dominant strategy for both players to pick steal, and therefore this becomes the Nash equilibrium. So we have the Nash equilibrium outcome here, and we have the collusive agreement here. Clearly, the collusive agreement is much better than the Nash equilibrium, but again, this is a game show, and we know that the game show was set up so that players try to steal money from each other because A, that means the game show isn't going to have to pay out money, and it makes for really, really good TV. So now let's talk about situations in which there aren't two dominant strategies. Okay, so let's go through this game. This is an advertising game where you have an old incumbent firm and a new firm, a new entry into the market. And they're choosing whether they want to advertise or do not advertise. Let's put ourselves into the shoes of the new firm first. If the old firm advertises, then the new firm clearly wants to advertise because 5 is less than 10. And so when the old firm advertises, the new firm also wishes to advertise. And then if the old firm does not advertise, again, we can see that the new firm wishes to advertise because 5 is less than 15. And again, these are profits. So the new firm has a dominant strategy to pick advertise. It doesn't matter what the old firm does. The new firm has a dominant strategy to pick advertise. But now let's go through and develop the strategies for the old firm. If the new firm picks advertise, we can see that the old firm also wants to pick advertise, right? 19 is less than 20, and so the old firm is going to want to choose advertise. If the new firm chooses to not advertise, however, we can see now that the old firm has an incentive to choose no advertise as well, because 19 is less than 25. So here we have what we call a mixed strategy. And specifically, the old firm has a mixed strategy. And the way we define the mixed strategy here is that when the new firm picks advertise, the old firm wants to pick advertise. And when the new firm picks no advertise, the old firm wants to pick no advertise. Now, this is a mixed strategy, not because of the choice relative to the other firm, but simply that the choices are different in the two scenarios. In one scenario, the old firm wants to advertise. In the other scenario, the old firm does not want to advertise. And we already developed the fact that the new firm has a dominant strategy to advertise, and we know that the old firm has a mixed strategy, advertising when they think the other firm is going to advertise, not advertising when they think the other firm is not going to advertise. But of course we know, and as well as the players in the game know, because again, we're assuming perfect information here, that the new firm has a dominant strategy to pick advertise. The old firm knows this. And so therefore, the old firm will predict that the new firm chooses advertise, and then the old firm will pick their best response to that decision, which, as we just established, also is to advertise. And so the Nash equilibrium of this game is for both players to pick advertise. Anytime you have at least one dominant strategy, in this case, the new firm has a dominant strategy to always pick advertise. It doesn't matter whether you have a dominant strategy for the other firm or a mixed strategy, you're able to find the Nash equilibrium. And again, you just play out the strategies of the game. Because we've determined that the new firm has a dominant strategy to advertise, and because that means that they're going to pick advertise no matter what. And we also know that the old firm chooses to advertise when they think the other firm is going to advertise, then this is our Nash equilibrium of both firms choosing to advertise. Now we can go through and we can look at the other outcomes of the game, and we can show how these are not Nash equilibrium. So for example, if the new firm chooses to advertise and the old firm chooses to not advertise, we know this isn't a Nash equilibrium because the old firm would prefer to be here. So they would not choose here, they would choose here. So this cannot be a Nash equilibrium. let's check this one. We can see that the new firm would not prefer to be here because this violates their dominant strategy. So this cannot be a Nash equilibrium because the new firm would prefer to be here. And then we can see that this also cannot be a Nash equilibrium again because we've already established that the new firm has a dominant strategy to advertise, and so the new firm would not want to be here. So in no instance of the other three outcomes can we call these Nash equilibrium because in each instance there is an incentive to move away from that position. However, when we consider this position, you can see that neither player wishes to switch, right? The new firm does not want to choose no advertise, and the old firm does not want to choose no advertise either. And so this must be a Nash equilibrium. And so that's really the easiest way to determine whether something is a Nash equilibrium is to go through the other outcomes of the game and see if players wish to deviate from this strategy given the strategy of the opponent. In other words, ask yourself, if I'm the new firm, do I want to switch from advertise to no advertise given that I expect the old firm to pick advertise? And the answer is clearly no, I don't want to switch because 5 is less than 10. And then if I'm the old firm, do I want to switch from advertise to no advertise if I think that the new firm is going to pick advertise? And again, the answer is no, because 19 is less than 20. So again, this is the Nash equilibrium. Now we can go through and we can see, are there any potential collusive agreements? And there are not. The old firm would not agree to this because they do better at the Nash. The new firm would not agree to this, nor would the old firm. They both do worse here. And then the new firm would not agree here because they do better at the Nash than they do here. So again, this is another instance where there is no potential collusive outcome. And again, the important point of this game is the establishment of this mixed strategy. The new firm has a dominant strategy to advertise, and the old firm has a mixed strategy, choosing to advertise when the new firm advertises, choosing to not advertise when the new firm does not advertise. But we've already established that the new firm will always advertise, therefore the old firm will advertise as well, and therefore we have our Nash equilibrium. Sometimes we have situations in which both players have mixed strategies, and this can create kind of some interesting outcomes. This is rare, but I wanted to show you these examples just to give you a full picture. So this is what we call the date game. We have two individuals, DJ and AC, and they're choosing between two different dates, going to a basketball game or going to a musical. And they have no way of talking to each other prior to choosing these particular date locations, but they do know the relative utility levels of the two players based upon where they go. In other words, if they go to the basketball game, AC is going to get 1 unit of utility and DJ is going to get 2 units of utility. If they both go to the musical, AC is going to get 2 units of utility and DJ is going to get 1 unit of utility. So they both only get utility when they go to the same place at the same time. So there's no utility when they go to different places. But we can see that DJ would prefer to go to the basketball game slightly, and AC would prefer to go to the musical slightly. Although at the end of the day, the most important preference is that they show up to the same place. In this scenario, if we go through when we develop the strategies, what we'll find is that they both have mixed strategies. Particularly, they both want to pick the choice that the other chooses. And so what I mean by that is, let's go through, let's do AC's strategy. So if DJ picks the basketball game, we can see that AC definitely wants to pick basketball because 0 is less than 1, and so they want to pick basketball. And then if DJ picks musical, they instead want to pick musical, right? Because 0 is less than 2. And so we can see there's a mixed strategy. So when AC thinks that DJ is going to pick basketball, they want to pick basketball. And when they think DJ is going to pick musical, they want to pick musical. And we could go through and we could see that the exact same thing is true for DJ. When AC picks basketball, DJ also wants to pick basketball. When AC picks musical, DJ wants to pick musical as well. And so we have two mixed strategies. When we go through and we develop these two mixed strategies, what we find out is that we do not have a singular Nash equilibrium. In fact, we have two Nash equilibria in this particular game. Anytime you have two mixed strategies, you either have multiple Nash equilibria or you have no Nash equilibria. Okay, but there wouldn't be a single one. When you have one dominant strategy, at least one dominant strategy, that ensures a single Nash equilibrium. But if you have two mixed strategies, then this means that you could have more than one Nash equilibrium or you could have none. In this scenario, we can see that there's more than one Nash equilibrium, specifically that when AC thinks that DJ is going to pick basketball, they also want to pick basketball, so they don't wish to deviate to picking musical when they think DJ is going to pick basketball. Nor does DJ want to deviate from picking basketball when they think AC is going to pick basketball, right? So this is a Nash equilibrium by our definition. And then on the other hand, this is also a Nash equilibrium. Oops. This is also a Nash equilibrium because when AC picks musical, DJ wants to pick musical, and when DJ picks musical, AC wants to pick musical as well, and so they don't wish to deviate. Right? And so these are two Nash equilibria. Now, when it comes to quizzes or when it comes to homework, I will not generally ask questions in which there are more than one Nash equilibria. It will always be a scenario like this, where at most there's one mixed strategy and there's a dominant strategy, and you're still able to easily find that singular Nash equilibrium. But I did want to show you that, again, in certain types of games here, when there's two mixed strategies, that you can in fact have more than one Nash equilibrium. On the other hand, there are games, in fact, where there are no Nash equilibrium. So a great example of this is rock, paper, scissors. And so if you have two players who are playing rock, paper, scissors, then this is the way the game works, right? If you both pick rock, it's a split. Neither one wins. If you both pick paper and you both pick scissors, right? So we can see here that these are the splits. And then, of course, if Jerry picks rock and George picks paper, paper covers rock, so George gets 1, Jerry gets -1. So 1 means they win, -1 means they lose. When Jerry picks rock and George picks scissors, rocks beats scissors, right? So George loses while Jerry wins. If you'll notice and go through each outcome, there's always an incentive for at least one of the players to move to another position. So let's start here. If they both are picking rock, they split, neither one wins. We can see that George would prefer to have picked paper. If he thinks Jerry is going to pick rock, then he wants to pick paper, so he would deviate from this and pick paper. The same thing is true of Jerry. If he thinks George is going to pick rock, he also wants to pick paper, and so this cannot be a Nash equilibrium. In fact, we can see clearly that any of the split outcomes are not Nash equilibrium because, of course, the players would like to win. But even if we check the other non-split outcomes, like for example here, when Jerry picks rock and George picks paper, we can see that Jerry would prefer, of course, to pick scissors in the case where George picks paper, right? So he would want to deviate from this particular strategy. And then if we check this one, George would want to deviate from picking scissors when Jerry picks rock, and so on and so forth. And you go through, you'll find that there in fact are no Nash equilibria at all in this particular game, and that's of course the whole point of rock, paper, scissors, is that there's no Nash equilibria in that game, and it's all based on luck. Right? There's no way to figure out, or there's no real strategy to the game of rock, paper, scissors unless you're able to sort of understand the psychology of the game. And there have been research papers which have tried to dig in to the psychology of rock, paper, scissors. But again, the point here is that we have multiple mixed strategies. Jerry has a mixed strategy. George has a mixed strategy. And because they both have mixed strategies, they have no Nash equilibria in this particular game. So again, I wanted to show you that when you have both players have mixed strategies, you either have multiple Nash Equilibria, as we do in the date game, or you have no Nash Equilibria, as we have in rock, paper,